This video is going to give you an explanation of the new process that we're going to put in place for dealing with support interactions between second and first line support teams and third-party suppliers. So to give you some background, so while we're introducing this new process, basically the current way that support teams deal with third-party suppliers is quite ad hoc, and different teams deal with suppliers in a different way. So because of that, it makes it very difficult to track any records that we send to our third-party suppliers. And it also means that it's very difficult to actually monitor how our suppliers are actually performing against any underpinning contracts we have in place with them. So it also by putting this work in place, it will make sure that we have some assurance moving forward that when we introduce new digital services, we have a process in place that is mature enough to enable us to say to the business that any services that have third parties supporting them, the support mechanism behind them will actually support that given new service. So that's the approach we're going to take to this, and we're looking at a two-phased approach. The first idea, the first phase will look to introduce a consistent approach to these support interactions. So it will start off being quite a manual process. Then the idea being that once that process is bedded in and gains some maturity, we could then look to introduce more automation in phase two of the process. The idea being that this will help the support teams to interact with their suppliers in a consistent way, not lose sight of records, keep on top of progress of records as they pass them through to the third party supplier to deal with. It will also give us the benefit to supplier management to enable them to actually start measuring the performance of some of our third party suppliers. So that ultimately it can give us assurance that the services that we provide to our customers can be fully supported. So phase one, which I'm going to show a video demo of in a minute, involves adding all suppliers as assignee groups to our service management tool. So all of those suppliers that the second line and first line support teams deal with will be added as assignee groups in Marvel. The records will then be assigned to the relevant third-party supplier. So at the time that you engage with the third-party supplier, you actually assign the record to that given assignee group. In the first phase, we're going to tie all of those suppliers to a generic underpinning contract. So this will give us a feel of how long certain suppliers will take to respond and deal with given records when they're passed on to them. As part of phase one, we're going to look to set up every first and second line support team with home pages so that they can monitor the progress of any records that go to the third party supplier, so they can keep track of those records and they don't lose sight of them. The phase one will involve manually updating the records. So when a record first goes to the supplier, they will manually pass that record to the assignee group, contact the supplier via the phone or via email or whatever mechanism they choose fit. And then when the supplier comes back to them, they'll manually update the record to say they've responded. And likewise, when the supplier provides a resolution, they'll go in and update the record accordingly. And this phase one will give us some crude metrics around time to respond, time to resolve for our third parties. And then once that's kind of bedded in, we'll look to introduce phase two, where we'll map specific underpinning contract details to each supplier. So where we have those details for each supplier saying these are the target times to respond to Land Registry's calls, these are the target times to resolve certain calls from Land Registry, we'll map all of those details into the service management tool. We'll look to use automated emails to raise the issues with the supplier. So the process will mature, and that every time a call is passed to a third-party supplier, we'll use the service management tool to trigger the email to the supplier. Within that email, it'll include a link that the supplier can click on to actually then update the record in real time to say that they've accepted the issue, and then when the supplier has resolved the issue, they can type in that email template what they've done to resolve it, click on that link, and via the automated mechanisms we'll put in place, that will then update our service management records in real time. At this phase 2, we can also look to introduce data into our configuration management system, so that any configuration items that are under the support or lease from suppliers, we can put details of those in our configuration management system, attach them to the given record, so that we can then start gaining some data and information around assets that are actually owned by third parties. And with this in place, we can then get real-time metrics to help assess supplier performance. So we're now just going to move into a quick demo of the first phase of this piece of work. So what I've got on the screen now is a mock-up of what the IT infrastructure supports Marvel system will look like when we introduce this new process. So their normal screens are here, so their list of changes they're looking at, and their incident and request records that are assigned to their queue are here. But what we've got in the corner here is we'll look for all second line support teams and first line support teams that have interactions with third parties. We'll add a new screen to their dashboard here called Supplier Assignee List. And this supplier assignee list will show any live ongoing records that have been assigned to third parties by this given team. So you can see here that there'll be a column showing them what the actual expected breach is in terms of the underpinning contract that's tied to those records. So to start off with, these will just be measured against those generic underpinning contracts. So each supplier will have the same generic values put in these targets here. From this column here, you can see which actual third party these records have been assigned to. So as I said, this is a mocked up version of IT infrastructure support. So this is just some of the teams or some of the suppliers that the IT infrastructure support guys will actually deal with. So Marvel Software, BMC, Microsoft, Canon, etc. So you can see which third party the actual ongoing live incidents have been assigned to. And so they'll get a view of all of that. So any live ongoing incidents they can keep a track of there. So to actually assign a given record to a supplier, to do that, what we would do is, so we'd go into a given instance. So say if we're dealing with this incident here, or the IT infrastructure guys dealing with this incident here about a Marvel discovery issue, what they would do is, as they're dealing with that incident, they would put their latest update in the history notes as they normally would, and then at the point of deciding that that record's going to be assigned to the third party supplier, they would then actually assign that record to them. Just load that record up a sec. There we go. So say we'd put a note in the record here saying we just say, Marvel, can you please advise on what needs to be done? So we add a note to the record in there. Come out of that, we then change the status here to third party, and we then actually assign this to Marvel themselves. So all of these third parties, we put a standard naming convention in place, so they all start with third party and then the actual name of the supplier itself. So we've got here, we're assigning this one to third party Marvel Software. So we then click on apply. So what that then does, that then puts that record, so it'll take that record off our the user's main queue and move it on to the third party suppliers queue. So this record will move away from IT infrastructure supports assignee group and move on to the third party supplier software. So we've got the option, we could send the email there if we so wish to include that in the support call with the third party supplier. I say that's nice to have there, so if you want to use that mechanism you can, or if not, you can just pick up the phone and speak to the suppliers, or do it whatever way you so wish at this early stage. So when that record is actually assigned to the third party, what would happen then, the next time you loaded that record in, so if I just refresh the screen here a minute, an additional box will appear down here, and it knows that this record is currently assigned to a third party. So at that moment in time when you hear back from the third-party supplier, so whether that be through an email or they pick up the phone and give you their reference number and say they've accepted the call, yay, at that point in time you would then manually click on this little link here that says click here to respond on behalf of the assignee. So once you do that, what that will do is that will actually capture that information in the underpinning contract details here. So you can see this record, it's got the service level tied to it, which is against the service party support services. But as we've assigned this record to a third party supplier, we're now capturing information regarding the underpinning contract that's against this given supplier. So by clicking that button, that will then update the details in here so that we know that this record has been responded to at that point when you click that little hyperlink that appeared there. At this stage as well, you can actually enter the third-party reference number you get from the supplier. So you would put the reference number in this box as well and click on apply. So that is the record in essence being responded to by the supplier. So again, at the point of responding, the record stays with the third-party supplier. So it's not until you actually hear back from them again with a potential resolution that you would look to update the record again. So again, each time you load up any of those records from your third-party supplier list, that little box in the bottom right-hand corner will appear. So this time we know that the actual record has already been responded to. So if we click in here, we can see that it was responded to at this date and time. So now if we hear back from the supplier via an email or phone call and they've given us a potential resolution, to actually update the record in real time, we now click on the click here to complete assignment on behalf of the assignee. So by clicking on that and then clicking on apply, what that then does, that then updates the record to say that the actual underpinning contract targets have now actually, the actual times that have been ticking against them have now stopped. So we've captured that actual, the amount of time that record has been with the third party supplier. And what the record does at that stage, it takes it out from the assignee group of third party Marvel in that case, and assigns it back to the previous person who the record was assigned to, who actually assigned the record in the first place. So in the notes, what you can then put is actually, you can copy and paste the details of what the supplier sent for you to try and actually resolve the issue. So they suggested an IIS reset and this resolved the issue. Yeah, so put that in the notes as you normally would, and then can just go on and solve the record as normal through to completion. So that covers all of the steps that you'll need to take to actually update the record in real time. As I said, phase 2, once phase 1 is bedded in and each support team has got used to dealing with their support interactions with their suppliers in that way, then what we'll be looking to do is when we actually assign the call to the third-party suppliers, we'll use the embedded email functionality. So the supplier will get an email from Land Registry that says, we've sent a record over to you. As per your underpinning contract details, it will reach its response time at this given date at time. There will then be a little hyperlink in that email. They can then click on that hyperlink, and that will pass an email back to Land Registry that the Marvel system will scan and then update the given record in real time with the given response date and time. And likewise, when the supplier actually gives a resolution, they will again respond to an email, click on the link, include the actual details of the resolution, so it will tell us what they actually need our engineers to do in that email, and all of that will be passed through into the record in real time at the date and time that the supplier has done it. As I said, that will be the phase 2 side of things. To start off with, we're just going to introduce phase 1, so introduce this concept of giving the support teams a standard dashboard view of any records they send over to suppliers so they don't lose sight of them. It gives us the capability to add a generic underpinning contract to these records, so we can start monitoring how long records stay with suppliers for, so we can identify any kind of areas where it's taking longer than expected, and actually managing the given instance in that way by actually assigning them to the given third-party supplier. and then using those hyperlinks to update the records manually so that we can capture that information. Hope that's useful. Any questions, then give me a shout.